Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Minnesota Vikings at the Detroit Lions in their Week 7 matchup played October 25th, 2015. As these two NFC North Division rivals went at it, we're going to go over all the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis. So starting off in the first quarter, a little less than 4 minutes into the game, Matthew Stafford picked up right where he left off from last week, and he hits Calvin Johnson for a 1-yard touchdown pass. Prater adds the extra point. It was 7-0 Detroit over Minnesota. Blair Walsh would hit a 37-yard field goal with a little less than 4 minutes left, still in the first, but the first points on the board for Minnesota, as it was now a 4-point game with the score Detroit 7, Minnesota 3. Then with less than 90 seconds left in the first quarter, Matthew Stafford threw his second touchdown pass of the game. This one a 7-yard pass to Eric Ebron, the tight end for Detroit. And with the extra point by Prater, it was 14-3 Lions over the Vikings. So that was the score after one. And in the second quarter, a little less than 4 minutes in, Blair Walsh hits a 53-yard field goal, his second field goal of the game. It was now an 8-point game as the Vikings trailed the Lions 14-6. Then with about 5 minutes left before halftime, Matt Prater hit a 52-yard field goal, and it was now 17-6 as the Lions extended their lead back to 11. Then with less than 2 minutes left before halftime, after the 2-minute warning, Teddy Bridgewater hits Kyle Rudolph, the Vikings tight end, for a 1-yard touchdown. But the missed extra point, and it was a 5-point game with the score 17-12 with the Lions still in the lead. But then on the final play of the half, Blair Walsh hits a 51-yard field goal, and it was a 2-point game with the score Detroit 17, Minnesota 15. So that was the score at halftime. Then in the third quarter, a little less than 5 minutes in, Stefon Diggs, the rookie, gets a touchdown pass from Teddy Bridgewater, a 36-yarder, and it was now 22-17 with the extra point by Blair Walsh, as the Vikings were now in the lead for the first time in this game. Then with 6 minutes still left in the third, Walsh hit a 35-yard field goal, and it was now 25-17 as the Vikings extended their lead to 8. So that was the score after 3 quarters of play. And in the fourth quarter, less than a minute in, Blair Walsh hit his 5th field goal of the game. This one a 22-yarder, and it was now 28-17 as the Vikings extended their lead to 11 points. So now let's fast forward to the final minutes of the fourth quarter. The Lions were driving down the field. They got all the way down to the Minnesota 1-yard line. So they're 1 yard away from scoring. But on 4th and goal, at the 2-minute warning, coming out of the 2-minute warning, they would throw an incomplete pass, which would turn the ball over on downs. So Lions were right there on the verge of scoring, but they come away with nothing, and now they turn the ball over on downs with less than 2 minutes left, and now the Vikings would have the ball on their own 1-yard line. They would be forced to punt the ball with less than a minute left, but instead of punting the ball and risking a possible blocked punt for a touchdown, they took the safety. The punter ran out of the back of the end zone. It was a smart play by Minnesota. Good coaching right there. And the 2 points go to Detroit, and it was now 28-19 as they were still up by 9 points. So it was still a 2-score game with less than a minute left. And so now they would give the ball back to the Lions. The Lions would have the ball, and they would end up turning it over on downs once again as they would stall on the Minnesota 36, and an incomplete pass would give it back to Minnesota, and all that was left to do was for Bridgewater to take a knee in the victory formation as the Vikings hold on to win this one 28-19 as they came from behind. As they were trailing early on, it looked like the Lions had this one in control as they were up 14-3 after the first quarter, and they were even still up at halftime 17-15. But then in the third quarter, the Vikings put up 10 points, and they shut out the Lions in the second half. The Lions' only points in the second half coming off of that safety, which was a gimme by Minnesota. which was a smart coaching play right there for them to just have the punter go out the back of the end zone, and they could afford to do so because they were up by 11 at that point, and they were still up by 9, and of course a touchdown with the 2 points is 8, so even with the, even if they had an 8-point, touchdown with the 2-point conversion, they still, would have been in the lead by 1, and so the Lions would have had to get 2 scores with less than a minute, which is not impossible, but as close to it as it gets. So Minnesota comes away with the victory. They're now 4-2 on the season. Who would have thought the Vikings would have had such a good record at this point? As they're in second place in the NFC North, 2 games behind the Packers, who had a bye week, who are 6-0. The Lions fall to 1-6. They're 1-3 at home. And the Vikings, this is their first win on the road this year. They had not won a game yet on the road, as they were actually undefeated at home, and they were 0-2 on the road until they win this one. They're now 1-2 on the road. So a big win for Minnesota in the division to get this victory is a big thing for the Vikings, as they've been playing really excellent in Minnesota, but they've been struggling on the road, but they've come away with a big win as they had to pull a little bit of a comeback. Of course, down by 2 at halftime, but Bridgewater had a huge day, his biggest day of the year, 25 for 35, 316 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Adrian Peterson, 19 carries for 98 yards. Of course, that is deceptive, being that 75 of those yards came off of 1 run. You take away those 75 yards, and he actually had 18 carries for 23 yards, as the Lions were shutting him down. He was only averaging, less than 2 yards per carry, averaging about like a yard in .4 until he had that big run, which is kind of what Adrian Peterson does, is that he just chips away, and then he'll break a big one, and then 98 yards looks like a lot, but when it's 75 on 1 run, yeah, that's good that you got a 75-yard run, but 18 carries for 23 yards, not so good. But for the Lions, Matthew Stafford, 18 for 26, 256 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 carry for 5 yards. And Amir Abdullah, he had 8 carries for 43 yards. And we look at the receivers. Stefon Diggs, another big week, 6 receptions for 108 yards and a touchdown, as Diggs has been getting it done. It was actually funny during the game. Diggs was covering Diggs. They're not related, but they're actually making some jokes about that. They're like, yeah, Diggs and Diggs, can you dig it? I know you could. Quoting from movies. But so then Eric Ebron for the Lions had 5 receptions for 89 yards and a touchdown. Megatron Calvin Johnson, 5 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown. Let me look at the kickers in this game. Prater, 1 for 1 on the field goals, 2 for 2 on the extra points. And Blair Walsh, 5 for 5 on the field goals, coming up big for the Vikings. He was 1 for 2 on the extra points. And then we look at the defense. Kendricks with 2 sacks for Minnesota. Smith had a sack as well. Greenway with a sack. Johnson with a sack. Griffin with 1.5 sacks. And Barr with a half a sack, as the Vikings combined for 7 sacks in this game, as they were getting up in Stafford's face. So he had those 2 touchdowns early on in the first quarter, but they really were terrorizing them for the whole game with those 7 sacks. They just kept coming at them, as their defense was actually finally playing on the road the way they do at home. As they'd been coming up big at home, but their defense hadn't really been traveling, but they did travel this week. Of course, they did just have to travel across Lake Michigan, over the Great Lake there, Minnesota, then Wisconsin, and then Lake Michigan, but not that far of a trip from Minnesota to Michigan, although Detroit is on the other side of the state. It's over there by Lake Huron. But anyway, so then Reed had a sack for Detroit. Ziggy Ansah had a sack and a forced fumble as well, and Hatoli Nada had a sack, and Vinoy had a sack. So 4 sacks for Detroit. We look at the team stats. 25 first downs for the Vikings, 14 for the Lions. And on third downs, 5 of 13 for Minnesota, 38% converted. They went for it once on fourth down, did not convert. The Lions were just 1 of 10 on third downs, just 10%. And when you only convert one third down, you're probably going to lose, although we did see two teams today convert only one third down and win. But Detroit was not either of those teams. They went for it twice on fourth down, and they did not convert either time. Net yards in the game, 425 for Minnesota, 274 for Detroit. On the ground, 140 netted for the Vikings, 77 netted for the Lions on the ground. Through the air, 285 netted for Minnesota. Bridgewater sacked 4 times, losing 31 yards. And for Detroit, 197 yards netted through the air as Stafford was sacked 7 times for a loss of 59 yards. We look at penalties, not really a lot of penalties in this game. 5 against the Lions for 30 yards, 3 against the Vikings for 31 yards. 2 fumbles for the Vikings. They lost 1, recovered 1. Then we look at the red zone, just 1 for 4 for Minnesota, just 25%. Detroit 2 for 3, 66%. And the time of possession, 36 minutes, 27 seconds for Minnesota, 23 minutes, 33 seconds for Detroit. Is the Lions, they look like they might have had this one at home against their division rival, but they couldn't do it. They couldn't complete the game. They didn't play the complete game. They didn't, keep it going for the whole 60 minutes. As you saw, and even in the second quarter, they let up 10 points in the final, 9 points rather, in the final 2 minutes of the first half, as that's really when the comeback started. As we saw, the Vikings score, 19 straight points during that stretch, and then into the fourth quarter, that's actually 22 straight points after having been down 17-6. They scored 22 straight before letting up that safety, which you take away the safety, then it's 22 unanswered points. Of course, they gave Detroit those 2 points there in a very good coaching decision by Minnesota. Give their coaches credit for making the smart call there to just have the punter take the safety, which really did secure the win, because if you go for the punt, the Lions block it, they get a touchdown, then it's, anyone's game. But instead, with the safety, give them 2. They still need 2 scores, whereas they would only need 1 score if they would have got the touchdown there. Of course, they also, a really big goal line stop there for Minnesota to stop the Lions on the 1-yard line, to force them to turn the ball over on downs, as they didn't come away with any points, not even 3, of course, at that point. With down by 11, what's 3 going to do you? Well, it would have put them in a position where they could have tied the game with 8. And, of course, Minnesota wouldn't have been, backed up against their own end zone and all that. But, yeah, Detroit not able to pound it in, and that's been a weak spot of the Lions, is their running game. Of course, it really comes down to the trenches, and that's where the Lions' they're the weakest. I mean, they let Stafford get sacked 7 times, just porous protection. They couldn't protect him. And so that offensive line causing them troubles on the pass protection and in the run blocking, not getting it done. And they lose another game, as they've been a huge disappointment this year. And the Vikings are playing better than anyone outside of Minnesota would have expected, sitting at 4-2 and in second place in the NFC North. So big victory on the road for Minnesota, getting their first road victory of 2015. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.